We all have something to share. No share with Dr. Dave.
Thank you for tuning in to the Null Show with Dr. Dave podcast. I am Dr. Dave A. Cornelius, affectionately known as Dr. Dave. In this episode of Singing the Good News on the Null Show with Dr. Dave podcast, my guest, Brian Goodall, from City Psalms, who's specializing in creating spaces for songwriters to transform biblical text and contemporary prayers and heartfelt prayers into great anthems and songs. We're going to spend some time with him learning how you could use a single prompt like the grit and grace of Psalm 94 and how we can inspire songwriters and help them sing the good news in entirely new ways and unique ways.
Oh Lord, God of quiet, let your glory shine. Won't you rise, oh judge of the earth, step into the light, draw the line.
Hey Brian, welcome to the Null Show with Dr. Dave podcast. I am so excited to have you here today.
It's good to be here, Dr. Dave. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Give us some insight about your inspiration for City Psalms. It's really a cool thing.
Yeah. So City Psalms started about 11 years or so ago as a project of a prayer domain for a ministry called For Tucson. Mm-hmm. And basically what it was intended to do was to be a resource for our community, for Christians to engage in prayer for Tucson, see Tucson as our mission field. And so we started finding songwriters, Christian songwriters and musicians who shared the same heart. And we started working on albums that would become songs of prayer for Tucson. We called it City Psalms 1, City Psalms 2. And that's how it started, was we just love our city. And we believe that God has incredible plans for it as we submit to him, and that Christians are to engage in seeing our community as our mission field. And this is one way that the arts can make an impact.
No, really, it's amazing. It's amazing. I've been hanging out with you guys maybe for the last year and a half, and I've learned so much, and it's great to be in a community like this, right?
Yeah, it's everything, really. I mean,
yeah.
It's better when we do it together. I mean, that's a simple thing to say, but it's so true. It's what Jesus prayed, is that we would be one like he and the Father are one.
Yep.
And that would be the vehicle for which the world would know God's love is through our unity. Right. And then it's also just, we do things when we collaborate, we make better things. We're stronger. And yeah.
I mean, there's even a biblical verse about that, right? When 2 or 3 of us gather together,
Yeah, or the
right?
cord of 3 strands can't easily be broken. And there are lots of different passages. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was really surprised with the prompt for Psalm 94.
Yeah.
Really heavy justice focus. How do you encourage all of us songwriters to help us find our unique melody, voice, without feeling overwhelmed by the weight of the text or even the constraints of the text?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it is just the challenge of it, that it's something really challenging. And I think that might stir up a little bit of creativity within us to say, oh man, how do we tackle this? I think it forces us to really engage with the text at a deeper level, because it's a challenging text. So we really have to understand the context of it and let it kind of work in us as we're working through it. Let the Holy Spirit move within us to help us to be able to put it into the practical, our own way of being able to relate to it. But I also think too that there are so many different ways that you can approach this from a songwriting perspective. And so I think being able to offer a lot of different creative ways to be able to engage, and just kind of like, as you're listening to all the different ways that you can do that, you might want to try it this way. You might want to try it that way. You could just do it word for word, which is great, because then you're memorizing it while you're singing it and you're learning it, it becomes a way of hiding the word in your heart. You could pull out a couple verses and just take that and then go let that launch you into another direction. And you could use different translations. You can try it from different perspectives. You can place yourself in a current situation and let that person speak to this text. So, say there's a current cultural or global issue that's on the radar, and if you can zero into a single person in that issue, and try to voice this Psalm 94 from that person's perspective. So there are just a lot of different ways to approach it, for sure.
Well, certainly, it certainly is. It was great to listen to all the different songwriters and their perspective as they bring, their ideas, their creation, right, to bear in those workshops. But when we get into those workshops that you lead, what have you noticed that has happened with songwriters' creative process? Are they wrestling with, sometimes we're wrestling with the same Bible scripture in a room full of other artists versus just being at home alone, writing. So what have you noticed in that space, that creative space
Yeah,
that you've
for
created?
me, I'll say, I get in my songwriting ruts. I don't know about you, but I tend to go to the same kind of like voicings on my guitar. I'll go to some of the same melodies, same styles. I just kind of gravitate toward those. And for me, being able to hear somebody take the same prompt and go all these wild directions, it unlocks something in me to be able to think of things in way more of a creative term, to be able to get outside my box. I'm always just really encouraged by how many different ways you can take the same source and approach it. It's like all these styles, all the different viewpoints, and so it always broadens me. It encourages me. It gets me out of my own bubble. It's been super helpful in all those ways. I think my favorite songs that I put together recently have been ones that have been forced out of my own bubble, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. But, just locking into Psalm 94, as we transition from this cry of vengeance to a declaration of consolation, as you start to mentor and give feedback, how do you help the writers translate those shifting emotional gears so that we have like some level of cohesion? Or maybe there isn't a cohesion, but, there's a possibility that could happen, right?
Yeah, I don't know. So I think that that's good to be able to find a way in a song to shift emotional gears. But I don't know that you need to do that with every song. I think like Psalm 94 covers a lot of territory. I think for me, it's okay to sit in one spot. Um, and not everybody agrees with that. I think that there are a lot of people who believe that when you're approaching a song, that it's good to be able to tie all the pieces, tie all the,
Yeah.
And let it have some conclusion to it. But I really been feeling recently like I think God invites us to sit in lament and maybe hold on to, maybe not in a single song, maybe not go to that process of going to the consolation piece yet, but just letting that first part play out.
Yeah.
I also know a lot of songwriters who, and I've written songs too, where you start in that place of desperation and then you move into consolation, and that's effective. But I don't know that you have to do that. I think that there are ways that you can stay in one spot, and maybe later on another song could be that place of consolation, that you don't feel like you have to put like all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there in Psalm 94, there are verses that are weighty, and uh, maybe God would have you pause on those one or two verses and just just meditate on them for a while. And maybe that's what a song could do.
No. So, I completely align with that, that we have the flexibility, certainly, to stay in one space or expand or combine. I love the experimentation and the option to explore those different avenues. But as we look at the work that you've been doing, as you're connecting, the Bible with the city of Tucson specifically, um, how are some of these prompts? Because this isn't the first one. This is perhaps was that the first prompt that you started with for the year, or you did something
For
before
this
that?
year,
Yeah.
yeah, for this year, I can't remember what the other prompt was that we did, but we've done a few different
Okay.
prompts. This was the first time that we did a showcase of everybody's whoever wanted to share what they did
Right.
with the prompt, which I thought was really great. I loved that. That was so fun. Uh, Kind of a concert for ourselves. You
Yeah.
hear people share, go up on stage. We have nowhere else to be. We're having lunch. We're just hanging out, and we just get to hear people share their interpretation of the psalm and in a musical form. And yeah, it was really rich.
Yeah. So, how does that psalm itself help a contemporary songwriter in Tucson or somewhere else really sing the good news? Because that's what I think that we're doing, is singing the good news in a way that kind of feels genuine in today's culture.
Yeah, and so the good news is that God is a God of restoration, and that He's redeemed our lives from an empty way of life that's been handed down to us, and that ultimately, right, He's going to restore all things.
Yeah.
And so, what we engage in right now is not it's not how it was meant to be, and it's not how it will be. And Jesus is the one who makes all things new. So I think that from the perspective of the good news, as Christians, we approach challenges and cultural clashes and hard things in our world with confidence and not without fear. So we're willing to engage in these things. We're willing to talk about them. We're willing to sing about them. And so I think there are a lot of things in Psalm 94 that are very applicable to what we're going through. I mean, there was a lot of me when I was working on Psalm 94. I was thinking about, and I don't know when somebody might be listening to this podcast in the future, but with all the stuff that was happening in Minnesota surrounding ICE, and everybody's such a polarization of people on all these extremes, and the hurt on both sides and everything like that. And so for me, just thinking in terms of God being the one who is the God of vengeance and justice, and that when things aren't right, He desires for things to be made right. And we can cry out from a place of justice and hurt and saying, this is not right. And the good news says that that's not right, and that it will be restored, it will be redeemed, and there's a place for us in that. And Jesus is the one who makes all things new. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I think, it's seeing these words of how long will the wicked triumph, from the perspective of the good news, is that we know that God is the one who ultimately triumphs, and that all things will be restored, and He will make all things new, and these things will be redeemed, and He will be the God of justice. He does see, He does know. And so I think it gives us confidence to be able to approach these really hard things, because the good news is what builds a foundation under it, right?
Yeah. And creates that opportunity for us to see hope.
Absolutely. There's always, yeah, this is a shadow of what we can expect things in the future to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. sometimes we may think that having a prompt may be restrictive in some way, but it also works in a different way where it helps like a songwriter who feels stuck or dry, um, to maybe have more creative freedom. What is that experience like, or what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah,
Since we both
I
went
mean,
through it.
yeah. Would you say, I mean, is it easier to have to start from a blank page or with something on the page? You know?
Yeah, it depends. I could just tell you like my process. I took, many different versions of Psalms 94 and threw them together and tried to distill something out of it. And and that
Yeah.
was my creative process, right? Because even though I read it from this version to that version, what is it like when you put it like 6 or 7 versions together? Mm, it comes
Yeah.
out with something different.
It's always nice, I think, to have a little guardrail,
Yeah.
and to give a little bit of direction. And I think creativity can really flow out of that. Whereas sometimes when you can do everything or when everything is wide open, it's like, where do you start?
Yeah.
But if you can just get that little, that first step, you can find yourself wandering into really cool places.
Yeah, I mean, no, I could certainly relate to that because, I was just struck by the noise of the world as you were talking about versus the stillness of God in itself. And and so while I was going through the process, right? I mean, and I came up with this quiet and clamor, right? The quiet of God and the clamor, the noise of this world.
Yeah.
I took a different approach in terms of making it a bit jazzy, spoken word, kind of like and then which represents kind of the clamor, but then I switched over and grabbed my ukulele, and went from like this dark minor thing to like this bright C major thing called a circle of quiet, right, where I'm singing like more in a reggae version. So I took a totally different approach, but it was good to have that constraint, those guardrails, as you said, that enabled me to see the world like, oh, what's possible? All right, how can I make this whatever I want it to be without it having to be a singer-songwriter kind of approach to things? So
Yeah. And it's great to have an entry point into the
yeah,
creative process. If for whatever reason, you know, you that you don't end up going the direction that you were thinking you might go, it gave you a place to start,
yeah.
you know?
What advice would you give to songwriters, whether they're in Tucson or elsewhere? Because my podcast goes global, so it's what advice for those of us who wants to sing the good news or continue to be in the space of singing the good news? What kind of guidance you want to give those individuals listening?
Yeah. I think it's a really great way to serve the Lord. And I think that he wants us, regardless of what ability we have or how we might measure up to others. It's not our job to be able to figure out how we measure up to others. Uh, that gets us in all kinds of bad territory. But he wants us to be faithful with that. And whether that's for one person, or maybe it's just a devotional thing where you write the song and nobody else hears it, but it's just between you and God, and he's the audience. He's pleased with that. But if you share it and it only gets shared with one person as opposed to, at what's the line where you say this is the amount of people where it becomes uh, a good thing or profitable or whatever. There's no line. You can't say it after 99 people. That's when it starts. That's when it becomes like useful or whatever.
Yeah,
You've got one person who needs to hear it, and then there may be somebody else, a writer who writes for millions, and it's all being faithful to what you've been called to do. And so I think that's number one, is if you're called to write, be faithful to that and write. And then the second thing I would say is treat it like going to the gym. And what I mean by that is there's a principle called just showing up. You got to show up. And so, and it's a principle with prayer too. You maybe not every single time you go to the gym, you're maxing out, right? That's not realistic at all, but you have moments where you go to the gym and you are able to do more. And then there's sometimes you just show up and you're like, all right, I made it, but that was good enough, And at some point it's the cumulative effect of being there and making it a habit that starts to produce the results. And same with prayer. Like, you're not, maybe every time that you go to the Lord in prayer, you don't get these, life-changing words from the Lord, right?
Yeah.
But if you are continuing to show up, then you're available for when the Lord speaks. So with songwriting, you show up just a few minutes every day. So maybe you create nothing. That's okay. But then all of a sudden you're in the grocery store, you've been working on that melody and it's been escaping you, but all of a sudden you're grabbing a bag of coffee and it just hits, and it's because you showed up and now you're carrying it with you everywhere you go. And it helps you to be able to the creative process continues. And so I think showing up is key. Keep on showing up. And so those are my two big thoughts.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, and what just struck me as you spoke about having the audience of one and having the Father being that audience should be good enough, should be enough. I think that's just really powerful as a thought to carry forward for whoever listens to this podcast. So, thank you so much. And I look forward to the work that's coming up in February about Holy Cross, Santa Cruz. And I'm not going to make my conversation about St. Croix.
That's good.
Yeah. So, yeah. Thank you so much. And, look forward to us connecting.
Yeah. Thanks for your time. And thanks for allowing me to do this.
Yeah. Anytime, brother. Anytime. Hey, thank you for listening to the Null Share with Dr. Dave podcast with my guest, Brian Goodall. Brian, thank you so much for leaning into this conversation with me today and for sharing your heartfelt and insights about just songwriting and songwriting here in Tucson, Arizona. As we finish this episode, we remember that the good news lives through our leadership, our actions, and our love for each other. If you want to carry forward the rhythm that you experienced today, you could find our latest music through the Living Water album in the song what we call the Quiet and Clamor. And it's now available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and wherever you find your streaming audio, just go and search for The Quiet and Clamor by Kingdom Living Shalom. And just let the rhythm and of Thanksgiving become the soundtrack of your day. So until next time, keep your heart in tune and your spirit in rhythm. And this is Dr. Dave, and you've been listening to the Null Share with Dr. Dave podcast, singing the good news. Be joyful always.
We all have something to share. No share with Dr. Dave.